Here's a story for you. A certain man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the wealth that belongs to me." So the father divided his assets between his two sons. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took over the land. He hired himself out to a local farmer who hired him to feed the pigs in his field. As he was feeding the pigs, he thought, "I would gladly fill my stomach with this food because I'm starving." And he finally came to his senses. He said, "My father's servants have 3 meals a day, a place to sleep. I have nothing. I'm going home. And I'll tell my father that I have sinned against him. Would he please take me on as a servant?" And so the son did. And so as he was traveling home, his father saw him coming. And his father ran to him with compassion. And the son tried to say to the father, "Father, hire me as a servant." And the father said, "No, you're my son. Bring the robe, bring a fatted calf. Have a party, because my son who was lost is now found. He's come home." The elder son, who was doing all the work and taking care of dad, was out in the field. And he was upset. He resented his brother. He'd stayed. He'd done all the work. And here, this brother was being healed with joy and with a celebration and with a party. My name's David Woodall with the United Church of Canada and the Emsdale Pastoral Charge. This is the story of the loneliness of a father. We grow our lives forward to be the best that we can be. We grow our families forward to be nurturing, caring, and loving places. And our prayer is that our homes will be places where compassion and hope are found. We remember some families that are not nurturing, caring, and loving places. There was a certain man who had two sons. And when we hear those words, our hearts begin to ache. Family, love, relationships are at the heart of our being. "I love you" are three of the most magical words in human civilization. And so when we hear the words, "A certain man had two sons," our heart ache, because it's a hard and so very real story about family, about what love and forgiveness and compassion is really like. This is a story of loneliness, and we all know what it's like to be lonely. It's the loneliness of a mother as she watches her youngest son leave home. It's the loneliness of a father whose children see him as the enemy. It's the loneliness of the youngest child who leaves the stupid family, only to realize that they are not so dumb after all. And it's the loneliness of the eldest child who does all the expected responsible things and is unappreciated. And we'll find ourselves in this story someplace. Like so many of the thoughts of Jesus, this is real life. And part of this story is that the sons don't recognize their relationship with their father. They think of themselves as servants, not sons. Have you ever asked your children to clean their room, take the garbage out, or cut the lawn? Sometimes the reaction is quite entertaining. And so it's not that hard of a stretch for us to see why the sons might have thought of themselves as servants. Surely our children know they're not servants, right? I wonder sometimes if we misunderstand our relationship with God. "God, I have kept a ledger of all the good things I have done for you and others. And I presume that you will repay me with long life, with happiness, with financial wealth, and maybe a nice holiday once a year." This listing of all the things that I've done, that's the servant talking. And when long life or happiness or financial wealth or the nice holiday don't happen, we discover that being a servant to God is not all that worthwhile. What we really want is to be the child who knows that there is unqualified acceptance, who knows that there is strength there to see them through difficult times, a deeper meaning than one that could be found on a simple ledger sheet. How often in the intensity of relationships do we misunderstand? We misunderstand our children, our parents, each other. How often do we keep a ledger to determine if you really love me? How often do we want to find a way to reach out to each other, but that ledger stands in the way? How much did that father want to find a way to reach out to his son, but he couldn't? How often do we want to find a way to reach out to the ones that we love, but we can't find that way? So sometimes we just let them go. What's that old saying? If you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. So the boy left, went to a far country. Sometimes in our relationships, we want to go to a far country somewhere too. Unfortunately, that far country to which we sometimes carry ourselves is the kingdom of deep resentments, quiet grudges, and harsh bitterness. And it's not a pleasant place. It's a pigsty, muck and mud. And we wallow in our own resentments and grudges. And no matter how much we might say, this is the start of a new life, those old feelings of bitterness, resentment, and grudges haunt us. And they make us petty, and they kill us on the inside. The father divided the property between them, and it wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. And there, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. After he had gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to hurt. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to his fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry he could have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. That brought him to his senses. He said, all those farm hands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am, starving to death. I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against God, I've sinned against you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand. And he got up, and he went home to his father. So what are we supposed to do with these relationships that are so important to us, but they bring us so much pain? How are we supposed to treat the ones that we love the most when they hurt us the deepest? In our story, we hear these words. His father saw him and had compassion and ran to him. A chance for a new opportunity, a chance for a new start. Forgiveness runs. How are we supposed to treat the ones that we love the most when they hurt us the deepest? Well, compassion runs. Reconciliation runs. The hope, the possibility, the connection is the food of the soul. It's worth running after. The father went and threw his arms around his son because compassion doesn't walk. Compassion runs. And what you can count on and depend on is this. When you turn your face towards home, when you want that new start, when you want to bridge the past and create a new future, God runs and wraps you in arms of love. And while you're yet a long way off, God sees you and runs to you. God does not wait. God does not walk. God runs. God welcomes you home. God throws loving arms around you and calls for the robe and the ring and the sandals and to kill the fatted calf, because you who were dead are now alive. You who were lost are now found. This is the story of grace, not law. How do we rebuild relationships? Well, grace runs. Now, regrettably, sometimes you and I, we write forgiveness and compassion in a rules and regulations, conditions and stipulations, legalistic way. Even with loved ones or family friends, or we sometimes write the text, well, it might be written like this. While the young son was a long way off, the father saw him, and he remembered their last bitter parting. He remembered hearing that the inheritance had been squandered in a far country. And so he waited in the house until the young son drew nigh. He didn't move. The young son knocked once on the door. The father waited. The second time the young son knocked, standing on that porch, wondering what would happen. The father didn't move. He waited in the house. A third time the young son knocked. Finally the father rose and went slowly to the door. He opened the door, and his son fell on his knees and said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Take me back as one of your hired servants. And there was a long silence. Finally the father said, Well, who is this? Do I know you? Come in. If I am to take you back, there will be 97 conditions and stipulations, policies, procedures, rules, and regulations. And if after 5 years of dutiful and faithful commitment you break not a single one, I may then call you my son. Folks, sometimes we do this, even with the ones we love, even with families and friends. God teaches us well. What we can count on and depend upon is that God runs to us with compassion. Run to the ones you love the most, your family, your friends, because compassion, your forgiveness runs and wraps arms around them. Don't wait. Don't walk, run. Welcome them home. Welcome them back. Throw loving arms around them and call for the robe and the ring and the fatted calf. And what the gospel text says is, and the good news is, well, the young son was yet a long way off. His father saw him and had compassion and ran and welcomed him home. I love you. 3 of the most magical, helpful, hopeful words we'll ever hear. To you, God says, I love you. God runs to you with compassion. God invites you to run with compassion. God welcomes you home with compassion. God invites you to welcome home friends and family and loved ones and strangers with compassion. The time to wait is over. The time to run has come. A certain man had 2 sons. But in the end the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe. Let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Welcome home. God bless you all.